Venez nous visiter pour voir nos électroménagers, systèmes électroniques, les télévisions et nos meubles que nous avons en magasin. Nous offrons 36 mois en paiement égaux ou 13 mois sans paiement. Ceci sans intérêt.
Laisse-moi parvenir en ville, par moitié ma tête de bois. Dis-moi, laisse-moi pas tranquille, dis-moi, je vais plus m'en aller.
Venez passer une journée, marcher, pédaler, observer ou juste respirer. Découvrez nos 22 sites de spectacles sur parcquebec.com.
Dis-moi, je vais plus m'en aller.
Welcome to A Slice of Home. Today we have a very special guest. With his busy schedule, we have Mr. Frank Dottori, President and Chief Executive Officer of Tembec, who's going to talk about the lumber trade dispute. So we're very fortunate again to have him, and I want to welcome Mr. Dottori onto the show. Thank you. Can you explain to the people what is going on with the lumber trade dispute?
Well, simply put, the Canadian industry is a lot more efficient than the U.S. industry, and the Americans, due to their system, have ended up paying too much for their timber, and so are not profitable because they haven't modernized their mills. And the U.S. Trade laws allow them to take action against other countries, and so they've convinced their government basically the Canadians can compete against us. That's why Tembec can ship lumber into Florida and we can't compete even though we're here in the backyard, so they must be subsidized.
Okay.
And so they've asked the government to put tariffs to prevent us from shipping lumber into the United States, which would force the American prices to go up and then make profits for them. That's the objective.
Okay. How could this affect the jobs of the forest products sector?
Well, at 27 or 29% tax, like in our case, it means if we sell lumber, let's say at $300, we have to charge $400, an extra 30% on top of that. It'll price the lumber up significantly higher, and basically the price in the market may not change. So let's suppose the price of lumber stays at 300.
Okay.
And there's a 30% tax. That means that
Big increase.
this $90 tax means our mill net, what we get back now, will only be $210, not
Okay.
$300. Well, we don't have a $90 margin, which means that you can't run your mills.
That's right, because it would
Now,
be
if the-
too high.
That's right. If the price goes up by $90, then it's okay. But if it doesn't, then it means we'd have to shut down our operations because we
Okay.
can't compete.
How high are the risks for all involved?
Well, there's a fair amount of risk. Probably Tembec probably has lesser of a risk because we're more integrated,
Okay.
and in the sense that we need the chips, so we'll probably have to run our sawmills in any event. We think about half that tax will be absorbed by the
Government? No?
the American buyer. He's
Okay.
going to have to eat it, so that the price, if it's $300 and there's a $90 tax, it'll probably go to $345, $350,
Okay.
and which means we only have to eat about $45, $50. And we think our mills, most of our mills, are low cost enough that we think we could survive if that happens. The danger is if there's a downturn in the building market in the United States and the prices drop and the market can't absorb the tax and
Right.
we have to take it all, then it's going to be very,
That's
very
okay.
serious for the Canadian industry.
Okay, that sounds very. It sounds risky in the sense that if the consumer doesn't eat up the.
Yeah,
The
we don't have a $90 margin
Right.
to eat. So if the consumer doesn't pay for it, it's obviously going to mean do we run our mills or don't we run our mills, or
Right.
we have to shut down some percentage of our operations.
Okay. A couple of weeks ago, you sent out a memo asking all employees if we could write a letter to our government to help us to support us fighting for our rights. One I'd like to know is how many letters approximately were wrote, and as well as what came about with them.
Well, just so you know, the purpose of the letter was that what the U.S. is doing against Canada is illegal,
Right.
and they're not supposed to do it under the international trade laws because it's an illegal trade action.
Okay.
And we would expect the Canadian government to defend us. And it's Canada's biggest industry.
Mm-hmm.
We bring home the paycheck, as we say, for Canada, about
Right.
$35 billion a year. So we would expect the Canadian government to
To
defend
absorb.
us.
Okay.
They do it for Bombardier, they do it for the oil industry, they're doing it for farmers, so why not for our industry, which is the biggest industry in Canada? And what we ask our employees is to write letters to the government, basically saying to them, hey, help protect this industry.
Right.
And we want the government to basically to give us loan guarantees for our exports to allow us to survive until we settle this thing in court.
Support us.
Basically, that's right, to support
Okay.
us till we get this thing resolved in court.
Okay.
And the Canadian government is talking that line, but so far has not carried out any concrete action. And we think we need strong political support.
Okay.
So the government understands that if they can do it for the other people, they should do it for this industry
Right.
as well. And that's what we've asked basically our employees to do. The response so far, I think, has been overwhelming. I think just here in Temiskaming, we've had almost 1,000 letters sent.
Wow. That's
And
good.
I went and spoke recently in Hamilton to all the mayors of Canada, 1,400 communities,
Okay.
and they passed resolutions supporting the industry. We've got employees at all our other locations, so I think there's thousands of letters been sent. And I think that's what we hoped would
A big
happen,
plus.
and we're very pleased with the support we've gotten from the unions and from our employees. And I think they recognize it's their jobs here that are at stake. So we've got to fight this illegal action the United States has taken against us.
Okay. So you didn't just approach the Temiskaming employees, like you just said. You've approached all where our mills
all
are
employees
located.
across Canada, and
Okay.
in addition to different communities and mayors and where we operate, not only our employees but also the mayors and councillors and members of parliament.
Right.
So I think the response has been overwhelming. So like I said, we're delighted with what's
Good.
happening.
Well, it's like a personal touch with the letters showing that the interest is there.
Yeah, and contrary to what a lot of people think that companies have a lot of influence, in Canadian government, that is not the case. It may be the case in the United States, but in Canada, actually, Joe Citizen has more influence because, the politicians look for one vote. Companies
Right.
don't vote.
No.
Companies can have friends and whatnot, which might help, as you can see in the local politics. But generally speaking, politicians are very, very prone to listening when they get a letter from one of their voters. They listen.
I think it's important too. This 30% tax issue has a great deal of people concerned, and if we have to fight this issue, which I know we will, what will be required of all involved?
Well, I think that the danger that happens is that we have to pay this $30 for every $100 we sell. So lumber sells normally for about $300, $320. So we're talking about $100 every time we sell 1,000 feet of lumber. We have to issue $100 to the U.S. government.
Wow.
At least this is what we're doing now in
Okay.
cash. So that's a lot of money. So
Mhm.
in case of Tembec, for example, that we sell, we're talking about $100 million a year in that order. $100 million a year
That's a lot.
cash we have to deposit. Well, we don't have that much cash, lying around to do
Right.
that. And so what part of the strategy of the Americans is to bleed us to death, so to speak.
Empty
In other
us.
words, I can't afford to pay $100 all the time, so they're saying, okay, now you're going to come and surrender and basically agree to what we ask. This is why we're asking, if you recall, why we want the government basically to say to us, lend us that $100 so we can keep on fighting.
Right.
That's the strategy here. The effect is that if that tax stays there, Canadian industry cannot afford, doesn't have $100 margin.
Right.
So what happens is about 20% of the Canadian industry, I believe, will have to curtail and shut down. Because we're such a big supplier to the United States,
Right.
that will force the price up $100, and so the mills that are efficient can keep on running. So what's the key here is to be a low-cost producer.
Right.
It's always the case. If you're a low-cost producer, you can survive. So what can our employees do? We've said to them all along for the last 10 years, be a low-cost producer. You're the
reduction.
last guy standing if you're the low-cost producer. So that's what employees have to do. It doesn't mean carrying an extra 4 jobs, not doing anything, which sometimes, the unions say, well, we want to protect
Right.
jobs.
Right.
In this case, they better look in the mirror and say, we've got to be efficient. And it's not just jobs. I mean, it's a question of getting that extra little bit of yield out of the wood, saving a good piece of 2x4 instead of going into the chipper
Right.
to recover it and send it to finger joining. So it's a whole combination of things to get the cost down. And the same thing applies whether it's in pulp or whether it's in the other areas, because if we can make more money making pulp, we can probably support some of the lumber mills during this
Right.
period. If we can't support the lumber mill, we don't get chips, then of course that has an impact on our pulp
like a
operations.
chain
It's a
going
chain
on.
because
That's
we're
right.
integrated. So I think it's very important. I think all the employees will recognize it, that we have to be a low-cost producer. And we keep preaching that, and sometimes people say, well, it's all part of the company trying to, put the squeeze on us.
Right.
But I think now they're seeing the reality of it. The companies that are not low cost are going to shut down, and the ones that are will keep running.
That's
And
right.
I think there's the final day. That's the way it works.
And it makes a lot of sense. Do you think we will have to shut down any or all the mills in Canada?
No, we're hoping right now that we don't have to shut any down. We certainly have some marginal mills,
Right.
lumber mills. So we're concerned about 2 or 3 of the mills. We have 27 units, I think, in terms of mills across Canada.
Right.
And there are about 3 or 4 of them that are marginal. And the employees certainly are aware of it, and they're very conscientious and doing their best to keep the costs down so we can survive. And we're
Okay.
putting money in trying to modernize some of these mills. But I would hope that if we continue getting the employee support we have so far, that we're going to be one of the last ones to shut. There will be a lot of other people, as you've already seen an announcement, where people are starting to shut their mills down. So the high-cost mills will go first. And most of our mills are low-cost. If it hits 20% of the industry, we'll probably have to shut a couple mills down. But we're hoping that that won't happen. So as of today, we're doing it month by month, and we think we'll keep running until at least October.
Okay.
That's when we think prices are liable to collapse. And then we'll have to see where we go when we get there.
If the price of pulp goes up, will this affect anything?
It's good. If the price of pulp goes up, I mean, it means that we're making more money on the pulp side. So if we lose a little bit on the lumber side, we
we're
can
okay.
balance.
Okay.
It's the same as a few years back. Lumber was making a lot of money and carrying pulp. What's wrong in this downturn this year is that pulp, lumber, and everything went down all at the same time, which is
Yes.
why we're having such large losses. Traditionally, that doesn't happen. When one goes down, one goes up, and we're hoping that's going to happen. You see pulp starting to go up now. We hope next year it'll be up $100, $150. So that'll make a big
Make a
change in
difference.
terms of the company.
Under the NAFTA agreement, Chapter 11 previously mentioned if we have to sue the United States for $200 million was approximately, this could take time to pursue. What are the chances for survival until then?
Well, you got to watch under NAFTA. There are 2 chapters. There's Chapter 19, which is international, which is what all the industry and the Canadian government has filed under Chapter 19, which says what the U.S. is doing to us is illegal under NAFTA, Chapter 19.
Right.
And that they're not allowed to put a countervail against us because there is no subsidization in Canada. So we're filing under that rule. That will probably take a year, 2 years to get resolved, because then once you get a decision, you can appeal it. Now, we're quite confident we're going to win that one. That's why we're saying to the government, if we keep paying $100 for a year, like $100 million, we'll run out of cash.
That's right.
That's the problem. That's why we're asking the Canadian government to help us, fight, because otherwise they'll bleed us to death, and we lose even if we're right.
Okay.
It's a bit like you're innocent, they accuse you of murder, they throw you in jail, but they don't let you get out of jail for 2 years, you know. I mean, so we need time and some support to get there. What Tembec has done is something different as well. We filed under Chapter 19 along with everybody else, but we also filed under Chapter 11,
Which is?
which is a domestic regulation, which
Okay.
says, under the NAFTA agreement, the United States must treat Canadian and Mexican companies the same way they will treat an American company. They can't be prejudicial against us.
Okay.
And we say they are, because they're putting a tax against us,
Mm.
diminishing our market access, and basically picking on us.
Okay.
And they're not supposed to under Chapter 11. And so we're saying that is tantamount to taking away our property, because they're taking away our market, and when they take away our market, it means that Tembec can't make as much money, and because Tembec can't make as much money, it
Shut
means
down.
it's not worth as much, or we have to curtail our mills. Therefore, they are expropriating the value of our property.
Okay.
And so they can't do that under Chapter 11. And so we've sued for a minimum of 200 million.
Okay.
The longer this gets, the number will go up 200 million a
Right.
year.
Right.
But it'll take probably 3 years to resolve.
So we're actually fighting them under two chapters, the Chapter 11
That's
and the
right.
Chapter 19.
That's right.
And our odds of winning this are they good?
Well, I think there's been a recent decision with Pope and Talbot in Canada claiming the same thing against the Canadian government, and they basically won.
Okay.
So we think that gives tremendous strength to our case now, that
Good.
we're quite convinced that unless the U.S. changes the laws again, which they could
It could
arbitrarily,
happen. Yes.
we feel quite confident we're going to win. But it's expensive. It's going to cost us $5 million a year just in legal fees to get there.
Sure.
So it's an expensive proposition. But we're taking it seriously, and we didn't go into this just to create an issue.
Right.
We're going in there because we intend to win. And of course, the question is, what do you get when you win? You know, do you get 200 million or do you get 200,000?
You might not get
Yeah,
exactly.
You don't know because
That's right.
sometimes it's a technical issue. But we're quite convinced we're going to win under Chapter 19 and under Chapter 11.
Good.
And failing that, we think we're going to win under the World Trade Organization or the WTO, which is the next step in addition to the NAFTA is a North American Free Trade Agreement. WTO sets international law. And what the U.S. is doing is also illegal under international law.
Okay.
So we're saying if the U.S. wants